Hey everyone, welcome back to JP's Budget Collecting and our weekly look back at the hot comics from 6 months ago. This week we're looking back at the hot comics from September 30th, 2022, and I'm recording this on March 31st, 2023. As always, I give you those dates so you know when this information is actually relevant because the market is always moving and changing. Also, we're looking back at the CBSI Hot Top 10 and the Comic Tom Key Collector Hottest Trending Comics of the Week. They each put out a list each week of 10 books that are moving or hot in the market. So we look at those books and see, what caused them to hit the list, what made them hot, what made people chase them in the moment, what things have affected them since, and how they've performed in the market since. So we all make better decisions about whether or not we chase the hot book of the moment or if we're just a little bit more patient. If you've been following this list for the last year plus, everything has mostly been down, down, down. Patience is a virtue. Some of that is the books themselves. Some of that's just the market trend overall. But we got 17 books to talk about this week. Let's see what we can learn this week. First up, we have Halloween #1 from 2000, the first Halloween comic. This gets a little bit of an annual bump every year, but also there was, more buzz about a Halloween movie, that kind of stuff. Back then, raw copies were going for $200. Now, raw copy will cost you $40 to $100. So this turned into a big giant dumpster fire. Yeah, it's under $100, under more than a 50% drop in this book. Again, this is one of those kind of has an annual interest kind of thing that you just want to avoid that. Plus, you always want to avoid whenever there's something new coming out in the series as well. Next, we have 2 books related to a TV show. First up, we have Jeffrey Dahmer, the unauthorized biography of a serial killer. This was hitting the list because there was a Netflix series about this guy that I couldn't have cared less about. I'm not a big true crime guy, but anyway, this book was going for $125 back then, and this is also a dumpster fire as it's now a $40 to $50 book. Who could have predicted as soon as the little docu-series went away that interest in the book would go away? Can't imagine who that was who said dumpster fire months ago. Next, we have Jeffrey Dahmer versus Jesus Christ. Also even worse choice in my opinion. Also 100 plus. 20 to 50, another dumpster fire. Yeah, for the same reasons. Shockingly, nobody has interest in this comic when there's not a series coming out. Next, we have, we're going to move into some other option stuff. We have Rogues Gallery #1 on the list for the second week in a row. This was optioned by Don Cheadle's company. Last week when it hit the list, it was on the opposite list. It was really just $5-ish to $10 book, but there was just lots of sales. By this point, it was up to $15 average. Now raw copies are $5 to $20. So it's a little bit steady because there are several sales in that 10, 15-ish range. But steady, I'll be back, I'll call this, because there's definitely some sales still right in that range. But there's a few sales down around $5 or under 10 so that you can do a little bit better. So we call this one steady and I'll be back. Next, our last option-related book is Figment #1. Seth Rogen is supposedly producing a series based on this comic. At least that was the buzz back then. $20 to $30 for this book back then. Now it's a $5 to $20 book, with most of the sales down around 10, 15-ish. So yeah, this one turned into a trap from a $30 book, $25 book down to a $10, $15 book. Definitely another trap. Next, we're going to move into covers. We didn't have a lot of covers this week, only 3. But first up, we have Deathstroke Incorporated #13, the Ivan Tao 1 in 25. This is an artist that's got a lot of buzz in the last year or so that I'd really never heard of before then. He's kind of hit the scene. He's been a lot of buzz. He's got a lot of variants. Sometimes I like his stuff, sometimes not so much. This one's pretty good. This is one of the better ones, I think. But back then, this 125 was only going for $35. So that usually means a trap on a 1 in 25 because it's going to end up less than ratio when it doesn't even make double. But it's hard to say what's going on with this book. Asking prices are all sitting around $45 for raw copy, $45 and up, but there's no sales in the last 3 months. So those asking prices are clearly too much. So it's clearly not an up. There's only one sale actually, and it's a 9.8 went for $100. which would indicate it's probably a $20-ish, $25 book, which maybe is an I'll Be Back as opposed to a trap. I end up putting steady I'll Be Back because just when there's no sales, it's just hard to really judge. But definitely an I'll Be Back, as I would continue to be patient and wait for prices to come down on this because they're not selling right now. Next, we have Mighty Morphin Power Rangers number 100, the Tyler Kirkham 1 in 50. This 1 in 50 was going for a little over double ratio at 1 to 125. Usually, usually on 1 in 50, though, it's got to get to that triple ratio on a consistent basis of 150. And that's really the result here. Raw copies now are $60. A 9.8 went for $90. Both of those are only one sales, as people aren't even willing to pay the listing prices, which aren't that much more than what those two sales are for. So this one definitely turned into a trap. Not a lot of interest in this particular Power Rangers cover at this point. Next, we have Green Lantern number 45 from way back in 2009. This Francis Manapul 1 in 25 is pretty hard to find. This is back in the day when incentives were pretty rare. Didn't see a ton of them. Back then, it hit the list based on 2 individual sales. A raw copy went for $35 before it had been like a $10, $15 book. And then a 9.8 went for $200. Now it's back to it's a $15 to $40 book. Pretty good range on that. But most of the sales are really in that $30 to $40 range. Although there are a couple, which I assume some of those are just not quite as nice a copies, that are selling down below that. 9.8, 190, really close to that 200. So this is another one I'm going to give kind of the steady I'll Be Back label to. Pierces still have a lot of interest in this one. A really nice cover, but yeah, one that definitely has continued to sell in their same range for the most part. Next, we're going to move into a little comic buzz. We only have one comic buzz book this week. This is Dr. Afra number 24. The first appearance of the Dark Seekers, a new Sith organization or group that she's facing down, I guess, in the comics. Back then, raw copies were going for 10 to 20. With the release of new Star Wars characters, a little bit of buzz. Now it's a $2 to $15 book, so a little overlap on the lower end. 9.8, they'll only cost you $25 to $40, which is basically when you figure in shipping, it's basically, yeah, you're paying for the slabbing, if not less. So this is a down, and I'll Be Back on the raw side. But boy, yeah, you can get a cheap 9.8 on this one for sure. So those people that chase 9.8, they're not making much money. Next, we're going to move into our one DC TV related book, and that is Doom Patrol number 1 from 2016. This is the first appearance of Casey Brink, who is supposed to appear in Doom Patrol Season 4. Back then, though, this book was only this was one of those Tom books that they like to put on there because there's lots of sales, lots of movement, but it's only going for $5 back then. It's actually kind of up and worth it, mainly because people have made it aware that this is a key. And it's also kind of a unique cover. Now it's a $5 to $20 book. Back then I said whatever. And so far I'd say up and worth it. I wouldn't say cash. I don't think you're going to make much more than this on this particular cover ever. So if you got it for $5, then you're going to sell it, make a little profit, but not a lot. Next, we have Captain Britain and the MI-13 number 1 from 2008. The first appearance of Dr. Fasa Hussan. Supposedly this is a character that's already been cast for Secret Invasion, which is now, I think, coming in June. So we do finally have a date on that. I know we'd been waiting for a long time to get a date there. Back then, raw copies were going for 15, 9.8 up to 200. This is another one that's kind of putting it up and worth it. Now it's a $10 to $40 book. I'm a little surprised this one goes for this much. Maybe it's just the Captain Britain thing people think we're going to get. But yeah, with most of the sales kind of in the 20-ish plus range. There are a few sales all the way up to 40, but I only put it as worth it and not straight cash because majority of the sales are still in the range of that $15, or to slightly higher, but there are a few sales, 30, 40 bucks. Next, we have all new, all different Marvel Point 1. This is not the first appearance of Kamala Khan. This is not the first appearance of Sam Alexander, the Nova. This is the first appearance of Blind Spot. There's a ton it's hard to keep all these all new, all different Point 1 things apart. But this is the first appearance of Blind Spot from 2015. Raw copies back then were going for $10. 9.8 hit 110. And this is a character that supposedly may appear in the Daredevil show. We're still a year out from that actually appearing on Disney Plus. But back then, like I said, 10 and 110. Now it's a $5 to $15 book. So this is kind of still around the $10 for a raw copy. No recent 9.8 sales. So this is steady, and I'll be back. Mainly because it didn't have really that much any place to go, and it's kind of just sitting in the same place. So next we have Fall of the Hulks, Alpha #1, the first appearance of the Intelligentsia. Basically, rumor this was going on in the She-Hulk show. Caused a whole bunch of people to buy this book, a whole bunch of sales, but raw copies were still basically going for cover price. $1 to $5, $3, it's basically right there. But a 9.8 went for $125 back then. Now raw copies are $1 to $8, and 9.8, no recent 9.8 sales, even with 9.8s listed well under $100. So on the raw side, steady and worth it, because that's what the sales are. 9.8 side, I stand by my prediction on this one that it was probably going to be a trap on that 9.8, and I would guess it is when one actually ever sales. It will not go for that 125. Next, we have West Coast Avengers #46, the first appearance of Mr. Immortal, another character being rumored for the MCU. Yeah, back then raw copies were $10, 9.8, $291. Or is this a character that actually appeared in She-Hulk? I don't think so. But, I'm not even sure. If he did, he didn't make any kind of impression. Now it's a $1 to $10 book for a raw copy. 9.8, 40 to 165. But it's really 40, 50, 60, 165. So I put the whole range, but there was, with 4 sales, I didn't put the individual sales but on here. So yeah, that's a dumpster fire on a 9.8 if you paid almost $300 for this book. There is even the 165 is almost a 50% drop, but the other 3 sales are all under $60 or under. So yeah, definitely not a book that was worth chasing back then. Next, we have Wolverine, #155. This is, of course, related to, we got word that Hugh Jackman was coming back, was going to be in Deadpool 3. So this Wolverine Deadpool cover was jumped up and was selling for good money. It had been like a $25, $30 book. It became a $30 to $75 book with, high sales around $75. Now it's a $20 to $50 book. 9.8, $2 to $250. There was no 9.8 sales listed back then on, either website, because it was one that was on both CBSI and on Tom, but they're really just talking raw sales back then. So down and I'll be back. The range has kind of shifted back down closer to where it was. Still a few sales up from before the Wolverine Deadpool movie announcement. But yeah, down and I'll be back from where it was 6 months ago. Next, we have Wolverine 88, the first Deadpool versus Wolverine. Back then, this was going for $100 raw on average, 9.8, 6 to 800. Now it's a $35 to $100 book with most of the sales 40, 60-ish, with a few really high-grade copies going closer to 100. 9.8, 400. That's a trap on a 9.8. That's, between a quarter and a third of the 33 to 50% drop, I should say, depending on which end of the spectrum you paid on back then. So yeah, that's definitely a trap on that 9.8. Great book, great cover, but yeah, I'm sure it'll jump again when the movie finally comes out, but in the meantime, it's definitely been it was worth waiting to get away from the announcement. And then our last book is Star Wars Rogue One Adaptation #1, the first appearance of Cassian Andor. Obviously, Andor was just starting when this came out. Back then, raw copies were going for $20, 9.8 going for $150. Now it's a $5 to $20 book, 9.8, $100 to $150. So another I'll be back, just down a little bit. I do think this book shows up again at a higher price, and it probably ends up becoming a trap from those higher prices later in the season. I think, but maybe either way, it was an I'll be back if you jumped on it here at the beginning of the buzz. So that is our list this week. We actually had a few ups. We had a couple ups. We had a bunch of steadies, but still a majority of the books are downs, and would have been worth being patient on. So I want to thank you guys for watching, and we will catch you next time.